This ship collected 5 different life forms from the darkest corners of the universe. Monsters.
Collision imminent.
Invasive species. Predatory. If we don't lock them down, it will be too late.
Beware, spoiler phobes! You have stumbled into a storm of spoilers, a podcast currently covering the FX on Hulu series Alien Earth. This week we meet Peter Pan, trillionaire Boy Cavalier, and learn about his hybrid experiments with Wendy and the Lost Boys, while seeing a deep space exploration ship miscalculate how dangerous their cargo is. When the ship crashes into the company town of New Siam, Wendy's secret brother is put in peril as the xenomorph wreaks havoc on a tower of terror. I thought Eat the Rich was for our Hannibal podcast. This week's podcast is split into calm and storm sections. In the first calm section, we'll be talking only about the 2 episodes of Alien Earth that have been broadcast, titled Neverland and Mr. October. Then, after ample warning, we enter The Storm, a section where Neil and I will speculate where the rest of the series goes and will not apologize if we predict things correctly because we're good at watching TV. Why, hello! I'm Dave Gonzalez, and I cheered a little when the closing song of episode 2 was Stinkfist by Tool.
And I'm Neil Miller, and I am staying behind to guard the omelet. And welcome back, once again, to a storm of spoilers. Am I doing housekeeping this time? I think I'm going to do housekeeping.
Sure, let's go for it.
Let's do it. You are, of course, listening to our Alien Earth era. That means we're getting new pods every Wednesday afternoon. These are coming out a little bit later in the day, because as Alien Earth airs on Tuesday nights, we will be recording on Wednesday early afternoon, and then hitting you with those episodes with a nice little turnaround here. Hopefully we're scratching that itch a little sooner than we were for The Last of Us. If you are also interested in more terrifying xenomorph-related things, you can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/NeilStradamus, on Wednesday evenings around 8 p.m. Central Time, starting this week, literally today. If you're listening to this the day it comes out, I will be streaming the game Alien Isolation, a game that I started playing and then got a little too scared and stopped. Like, I never finished it. So I'm excited to give it a shot.
Well, good news for those of you that are too scared to play Alien Isolation on your own. If you watch Neil play it, I'm pretty sure you will get some hints to things that have been mentioned in Alien Earth and its promotional material. So Alien Isolation seemingly rushing closer against canon than a lot of the movies we've been watching.
Because timeline-wise, it actually happens kind of around the same time as Alien Earth. So they may actually become very relevant. So I'm very, very excited. So that's the schedule coming up. How can you get in touch with this show? That is easy. You can send us a raven at stormofspoilers@gmail.com. We got several that we're going to read as we go along through the pod. Some great stuff this week. You can also review us on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Of course, leave us a 5-star rating. You can say whatever you want. We didn't get any new reviews on Apple this week. So if anybody wants to hook us up in between now and next week, we'll read your review next week. But we did get one comment on Spotify, Dave, from Aiden. This one's for you. Aiden says, "Don't be ashamed of watching Foundation, Dave. It's a good show." Which is a reference to something you said last week. Some good sci-fi. I also wanted to mention here that this show, this Alien Earth show, produced by David W. Zucker, not the Zuckers, not of the Zucker Zaz parody.
Not the spoof suckers.
Not the spoof suckers. Different Zucker. He also produced a show that I really like that you can't really watch, but it kind of reminded me of another Ridley Scott sci-fi series, Raised by Wolves.
Yeah.
So, shout out to the Raised by Wolves fans. Anyway, you can also, if you like what you hear from Dave and I, you can join us at our Patreon, patreon.com/Dave and Neil, DA7E and DNEIL, for more content, bonus content from stuff that you can hear on this feed, our Lost era, Game of Thrones era. You can hear Dave and I go through Twin Peaks. We've also gone through The Leftovers. We are currently rewatching Hannibal, which has been really fun. We do an adventure pod every week where we talk about movies and other pop culture storms that we are chasing. And very importantly, you can get access to our Slack, where some of the coolest, nicest, least toxic people on the internet exist. And we now have a channel in there, the Face Huggers channel, for discussion of this series. And that's another way that you can talk back to us almost immediately. We may even have a few questions to answer here in this week's pod. So those are all the ways you can get in touch with us. I think that means it's time to start discussing these first 2 episodes of Alien Earth.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to start at the ending, because what a great place to start. I mentioned I cheered, and we got this raven from Jack S., who writes, "Just have to express my joy among other reasons for this show with the end credits music so far through the first 2 eps. I am excited for what the next 6 bring. Just curious what you think of them and the use of music has been so far in the show, since there's also been some more subtle songs played in the episode." This, of course, is referring to, I believe they have a TV on the radio song when Wendy transitions into her new body, and the 2 songs that we're mentioning here at the end of the credits at the end of episode 1 is Mob Rules by Black Sabbath, and then episode 2 is, like I mentioned, Stinkfist by Tool. I know a lot about Stinkfist, Neil, because
Sure.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a relapsed major Tool fan, member of the Tool army from the early internet days.
I actually didn't know this. I mean, I'm not a big Tool fan, but I'm very aware of Tool. I guess I'm mostly just aware that the lead singer of Tool is kind of a Tool himself, but they make good music.
A little bit. Just a little bit. Really surprised Maynard James Keenan got through Me Too, but he did. And now he's just, making music and making wine. But here we get the song Stinkfist, which is about sort of getting bored with everyday human experience and having to extend that with some extreme actions, like what you would guess it is with the title Stinkfist and the lyric "turn around and take my hand." It's not "take my hand with your hand." That I could tell you for sure. And then Mob Rules by Black Sabbath also seems to be somewhat lyrically related because it is about sort of like when the mob rule takes over, very specifically, if you listen to Fools, the mob rules. And that appears to be a good way to talk about this Earth that is ruled by like 5 different companies.
Sure.
As we are letting the fools run away with it. We get to only meet 2 of the heads of the companies this dual episode with Boy Cavalier and Yautja. But what did you think about using heavy metal music, it looks like, for the ending credits to this show?
I mean, I love it because, I love any show that closes hard on an episode and love a good cliffhanger. But I think these do, as you mentioned, thematically play a part. I mean, Mob Rules also sort of has several lyrics that reference like sort of the chaos of maybe civilian structures breaking down, or maybe the chaos of what might happen in a situation like if a spaceship crashed into your tower.
Or the sequence that it's used for in heavy metal, which I believe is like a raid on a town. I apologize. I've only watched heavy metal like twice in my life.
This song, of course, yes, originally from the heavy metal soundtrack. I think, with the recent passing of Ozzy Osbourne, folks may read this as a shout out to Ozzy, but it is important to mention that this is from the Ronnie James Dio era of Black Sabbath. So after Ozzy was let go from the band in the late 70s. And that's why it doesn't sound like Ozzy, just in case you're not like a Black Sabbath head. But still an absolute banger for the end of this episode. And then, I think Stinkfist very easily identified as a song about being like desensitized, right, to human emotion. And that, I think, plays into a lot of the themes we see in Mr. October, especially some of the themes that are emerging around Wendy and the Lost Boys, and whether or not their emotions can still be accessed in any way now that they are in these brand new bodies. And I found an interview that Noah Hawley did with Decider that was very interesting around these songs. And he sort of explains why and how this came about. And he said, I didn't go into filming planning to do that, which is put these songs at the end. But as I got into the editorial process, each episode kind of ends on a cliffhanger. What I'm looking for is to make an arena show, right? It's something that feels bigger than a small theater. It's an arena show. And so, I started to put these songs in at the end, these big classic metal or hard rock songs. So I think there's a couple of very interesting things that he says there. One, arena show, I think, is a really great way to describe the jump that Noah Hawley is making from some of his previous work, right? I would describe stuff like Fargo and even Legion, even though Legion has some bigger sort of VFX or sci-fi moments, as more intimate character studies, right? Whereas this is going to be sort of a big spectacle that he's putting on, which I think is cool. And it's interesting to see how not only his mindset as a creator, but his impulses are going to change as he tries to make this show that's a little bit bigger. But then also, Dave, each episode kind of ending on a cliffhanger is kind of awesome, because two pretty great cliffhangers here. And I think it sets the expectation that we're going to get 8 of these cliffhangers, which I like.
I mean, I also like the structure of the show having traditional act breaks, even though on my version of Hulu that I watched, I didn't have any ads, because it allows for these pacing builds. So you could build to a climax without necessarily needing to narratively pick up from that climax, which I think is just really smart TV storytelling. I'm also very happy that there's a non-zero chance Evanescence wakes me up at some point at the end of these episodes, and can't wait to figure it out. Is there a metal song from your past you hope ends an Alien Earth episode this season?
I would love to get some AC/DC at some point.
All right.
I mean, it's a little on the nose for a xenomorph, but like, let's do a little Back in Black.
I mean, Back in Black comes when the goo makes an appearance.
Sure.
I feel like that's the time.
Or like, I don't know, if maybe we get more cooler, like the Morrow's gun that he uses, his like electricity firing web slinging gun. If we get some more fun weapons, maybe we get Big Gun from AC/DC at the end of an episode. That would be kind of fun. So yeah, I like it. But I also, what you said about the commercial breaks or act breaks is interesting, because I did notice not until the end of episode 2 that there is this interesting pacing of the show. Like these episodes sort of zip by, but then I realized at the end of episode 2 that we hadn't gone very far in the plot, right? Like we haven't really advanced the story very much. So I think it's got this sort of interesting speed that it's going at that I wonder if they're going to try and keep. I don't think they can spend half or the entire season at the crash site, of course. But I was like, that's interesting, because I feel like it should have felt slower than it did. But because of the way the episodes are paced within the episode, it is moving very well, despite the fact that we're not necessarily seeing a ton of plot just yet, which is kind of cool. It's a good little bit of efficient storytelling that they're using.
Well, and it's letting its world building happen sort of like throughout dialogue and location, which I think is fun. A good example that I like brought up in the introduction is when the xenomorph kills the, I don't know, party of dandies. I don't know how to explain these people, but yeah, it's a bunch of rich people.
Kills
They're all
the
dressed up.
Caspians.
Yeah, and the Caspians have come. Boy Cavalier would have told me we're part of the same club. I love that little degree of world building. I think it's interesting, but also complicating that a lot of our pop culture touchstones are like Ice Age and Peter Pan and baseball of the 70s. That seems like a weird pick. I don't know how often I'm relating to my parents with, I don't know, stories about Nikola Tesla, but maybe that's like the equivalent in terms of time that's passed.
Maybe. I mean, it's also like, it's it's the year 2120, so it's 100 years into the future. So of course they have some weird ideas of what the past pop culture was. At first I was like, Ice Age, really? And then I was like, oh no, maybe that makes sense. Maybe people in the future are that weird that they're picking up Ice Age 4 as like their touchstone movie of the past.
I mean, just the fact that it has a movie, it is super interesting to me that we're in the future that could sort of make these synths and these hybrids and these cyborgs. But also, I think all the screens use like something like a 1970s era display. And when they're watching movies, it's almost exclusively on a projector, unless it's this sort of touch screen security camera thing. So maybe like all movies are projected. I don't know.
Sure.
There's like all these side things that are, I think, really smart world building. And then I was reading an interview with Noah Hawley on Collider, where he was like, originally when I did this episode, we started with the dialogue between Timothy Oliphant and Marcy then about the Scorpion. But he was like, I kind of feel like in order to be in this alien world, it has to be very distinct at the beginning that we're watching aliens. So we re-edited it to include the Maginot waking up scene at the very beginning. And again, that really is just smart. I am eased into a world that, thanks to our prep episode last week, I know a bunch about. I see a bunch of things that I think I know how these things are going to interact. I see, a doctor smoking cigarettes. I see a bobbing drinking bird. I see an orange cat, prowling around the ship. And I'm like, I know this.
Sure. And
then it takes a whole bunch of, I think, cues from the first Alien trailer in the flashes that it does during the title sequence. And then we hit the Scorpion. And it's just such a nicer easing into this story world than it would have been if we just would have started in a world that I had no idea what it was.
Sure.
Even right now, there was like a part of me while I was watching the first episode that's like, I'm glad in the future we seem to have rolled back climate change, because these big cities, seem to have pretty nice weather. That Neverland Island looks pretty nice.
Sure.
So at least we solved that, even though we seem to be obsessed with continuing our lineage. And I guess what this series, it's definitely an alien series. We get the xenomorph here. It's definitely a body horror series. We see horrible things happen to the crew, but is also sort of recontextualizing things like Prometheus and the previous Alien movies, because there are multiple companies and they're not racing to reach out in space. We're told in the early titles they're racing to define immortality, and the person who wins that race is going to own space.
Sure.
So I always thought Weyland-Yutani was out like terraforming all these planets, do what they can. We learned very early on in this series that the 5 companies have already like divvied up the close planets. And really, it's going to be about how do you get people out there? Will they even be people at that point? Sort of nodding towards some of the stuff that Alien Romulus brings up. So for a series that we were told at the beginning would sort of maybe be overwriting some Alien canon or not being necessarily as close to that as possible, it's doing a really great job of being like, here's where we're setting the world, here's what we know, and here's what we don't. Let's go. So, Neil, when you got to the idea of the hybrids, when you spend some time with Wendy, what was your reaction to that aspect of the series?
Well, I really like it because it to me, I rewatched Alien. That's the most recent thing that I rewatched. I rewatched it the other day. And I was like, this actually fits really well with sort of the ultimately revealed goal of the corporation in Alien, right? Like their whole goal is to sort of once the corporation is sort of aware of what's going on in the Nostromo, it's like they kind of want to capture and bring back, at the expense of the crew, bring back a xenomorph. And this series seems to be wanting to dive into why, right? It's not just that they were trying to do, scientific exploration. They are trying to capture the perfect organism to unlock human immortality, right? And I think that is maybe one of the core underlying themes of this entire franchise, which is once humanity spreads out and gets out into space, what's sort of the next frontier, which is conquering death. So I love that that's sort of where we start. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to go wrong with these Lost Boys, right? Like, I think my first implication, like at first when they were doing the montage, another great piece of efficient storytelling is the montage where Wendy is waking up all the other Lost Boys, right?
Yeah,
like we don't,
the
it's
one
not
shot.
it's not a long montage. It's like this really quick but very elegant way to transfer all those children into the adult bodies. My first thought was, is any of this process going to go wrong? And then it didn't. So now I'm like, at what point will these characters who are now in these sort of foreign bodies begin to go wrong in the eyes of their creator, right? Boy Cavalier. And we don't get any of that in these first two episodes. We kind of don't get any of that until we get the coming up on this season preview. But I feel like that's sort of the hint that's coming, which is like, we're kind of waiting for the shoe to drop, especially as they talk about Wendy not being able to really access her emotions anymore. And the fact that the show keeps reminding us that these are children inside of adult bodies now. It's going to be very interesting to see how this gets complicated, right? Potentially by them interacting with aliens, but also just the nature of trying to put human consciousness into a synthetic body will be very interesting. Something that the franchise has not yet explored. And I also kind of like that this is all, we can see this all happening simultaneous with what's eventually going to happen with the Nostromo, right? Like I was having this conversation with my friend Theo that I was watching the show with about Earth and what's been going on Earth throughout the 4 Alien movies.
Right.
And I was like, we never really see it. Like this show could.
We see the station in Aliens, the station they keep Ripley at is like in Earth's orbit, but we don't actually go to Earth.
So we kind of don't know what's happening on Earth, right? Like I think we may be going into this series assuming that this is all going to end up being like a self-contained thing where maybe they kill the xenomorph or they expel it back into space and it's not on Earth. But I'm not so sure just yet. Like I think especially because if they want to really push it, you get all the way to the end of Alien Resurrection and Earth is like completely destroyed. If they want to keep that as canon, this could be a show that sort of leads us down that path, like to show us how Earth eventually fell, to various forces. Could be aliens, could be artificial intelligence. Who knows? We'll see. But it's
we do
very
know
exciting.
In the 4th movie, if that is still canon, that the company does eventually fall.
Yeah.
Because the Marines the people that clone Ripley in that movie are beyond the company. So it is very possible.
So maybe
that
it's this war over trying to conquer human mortality that causes these companies to, maybe go into all-out war against each other or something. We'll see. Yeah.
It'd be very interesting to see. 2 things I like about the hybrids. One, I love this decision that because they're in synthetic brains, they're not having hormones produced, so their emotions are kind of muted.
Sure.
I think it's really leaning into some of the adult performers, but especially Sydney Chandler's sort of take on Wendy, that keeps it right in that sweet spot where is what we want is if they're too alien, pun intended, I guess, they become othered, which I think is a little bit more like Timothy Oliphant, whose look as Kirsch is sort of going back to Rutger Hauer and Blade Runner, but like the sort of synth superiority view. And then you have obviously the cyborgs, which seem to be, from what we could tell from what we see in Morrow, who I think is the only cyborg we know that we see in these 2 episodes.
Yeah, at least that's been revealed to us. I feel like there's
correct.
a couple on the Maginot crew. Maybe
right.
What's his name? What's the guy's name that
Mr.
they're creeped
Timu
out?
or something like that. The guy who's watching the girls sleep.
I think that guy is maybe a cyborg. And maybe when they're sitting down in the meal, he sits next to another crew member, and she also kind of has that like 1,000-yard stare. So I'm thinking there may be at least two other cyborgs on that crew. Interesting.
But they seem less human once they get some stuff in them. So it is interesting that we're being set up to, there's going to be humans and there's going to be the Lost Boys and Wendy who are sort of jockeying for their position. But they at least get this sort of innocence, which is really great to me. Over these 2 episodes between Wendy and Joe, I kind of feel like because the first 2 Alien movies are kind of about class struggle. The third one is a prison planet freakout movie. And the fourth one, I don't know, we watched it recently. Is it about anything? Who knows?
Sure.
Maybe it's about how...
It's about crossbreeding genetics with aliens.
Yeah, something... I think that Wendy, I mean, I love Ripley as a character by what I eventually know about her by the time her like arc's over. But Wendy is the first character where it's like, even if this wasn't an Alien movie, I'm interested in what happens to this character and her life and whatnot. So I am already super interested in this television show because over 2 episodes, it got me interested in not the xenomorph part of this story. But like, this is as interesting as what Ridley Scott was trying to do with David in Prometheus and Covenant, but because we're going to have so much more time, I am on the side of these characters much more than I've been on the side of any like alien protagonist since. It's always just been, I hope they survive. Now it's much more complicated than that because they don't think they're in any danger at the end of episode 2, it feels like, especially if she's gonna, leap off part of the ship after her brother has been taken by an invasive alien species. So I like that we sort of pegged during the preview episode that we're going to have to deal with like what happens to immortality when it comes up against something that could actually kill them. But I am also super invested in sort of, people have rightfully tagged as like the ghost in the shell Soma idea. When you transfer a living person into a synthetic body, are you just transferring the memories, or are you transferring the person and the soul? And if so, what is that going to mean in Alien? I think it is super interesting.
Yeah. And I think
also not great because we haven't seen this type of hybrid before and we've been pretty far in the future.
Yeah, that's true. And I think this is a really good place to mention that, first of all, Sydney Chandler, who plays Wendy, is just crushing it like immediately. Yes. And I think what's interesting is that the vibe, the energy that she has as Wendy is very different from what we see in the previews, right? Like she read in the trailers as a little bit more of the sort of classic, potentially like robotic character, but there's this kinetic energy that she has, this childlike energy that she's playing. And it's worth pointing out that that is a very high degree of difficulty performance for all of these actors who are playing the Lost Boys, where it's like, you have to play a child inside of an adult's body, and that for an adult actor is a challenge. And I think they're all pulling it off in really interesting ways, and that's going to be something to watch. And I think that contributes significantly to me being immediately interested in them as characters and wanting them, again, not just to survive, right? Like they're obviously in some kind of danger, but they don't think that, which is really fun, right? Like even the one where it's like the kid where he's like facing off with a little tentacle and he just does not seem phased by it. And I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? Get away from that thing.
Maybe don't watch Ice Age 4 Continental Drift. Maybe you should be watching Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that this show, maybe its first success that we can give it credit for is casting, right? Like, obviously, we're very excited about Timothy Olyphant. He's fantastic. We know Essie Davis is great. We even know that Alex Lothar, who we've seen in season 1 of Andor, which I'm sure is not is contributing a little bit to a lot of the reviews being like, this is Aliens Andor. It's like, yeah, it's got the dude from Andor.
It's got the guy in it. He's also from Black Mirror, where he does not play a likable character.
Yeah.
So depending on where you see him first.
So we do have plenty of like recognizable actors, but we have this entire cast of relative unknowns. Like one of the Lily Newmark is from Sex Education. I've seen some of them in certain things before, but relatively new faces, giving us some really good performances as child minds inside of, seemingly indestructible bodies. We haven't quite tested the limits of that yet, but we'll see.
I only know Sidney Chandler, and I guess I only know Sidney Chandler from High Straight Bangs because I clocked her in Don't Worry, Darling. I was one of the people that saw that in theaters when it came out.
Mm-hmm. Literally her only film role so far.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I saw her in that, and that's where I was like, you know what? Kyle Chandler's daughter did okay. So a slight little Nepo baby. It's Coach's daughter.
We got another Nepo baby? Amazing.
I mean, if they do good performances, they could be Nepo babies all they want.
That means she's an Austin native. That's fantastic news. Which is great because guess who else is also an Austin person? Noah Hawley.
Who? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a very, very Austin show. I love it.
Everyone's going to be at South by next year being like, here's season 2.
Fantastic.
Yeah, let's stick with the hybrids. We have some very important philosophical questions this week that you're prompting us with, Neil, that I like. If your grown-up mind wasn't so stiff, which I like the definition, but I'm also like, that is a definition that we're going to have to clarify a little bit as this series goes on. Would you willingly become a hybrid?
100%. Yes. Actually, 1,000%. Immediately. Yes.
Yeah.
As someone who, first of all, hates working out, hates eating healthy, struggles constantly in conflict with my own body, would I trade it for a synthetic upgrade, even knowing the side effects? Absolutely. Even if I knew that I was potentially going to eventually be impaled by a xenomorph, I would still be like, yeah, give it to me. Let's go.
Well, if you're going to be impaled by a xenomorph, that's even a better reason to become a hybrid because...
Yeah, because you wouldn't feel it.
Yeah. It also seems like new xenomorph lore, they respond to fear, and maybe being able to control your emotions a little bit would be a little bit helpful. Mm-hmm. But maybe there's something else at play with when... the alien does not attack the cyborg. We'll get there.
I also want to believe that my mind is not too stiff, even at this point in my life, that I would still be able to get into a synthetic body. I don't. Again, we need more clarification on what that means.
Yes,
but like, I want to believe that I could do it.
It's interesting to have this definition of a mind being like flexible and stiff to pair up with what Boy Cavalier says is his goal in this is to explode human potential so he could have a conversation that challenges him intellectually.
Sure.
Which I don't know if we agree that's his number one thing. He says it's not about the money, but of course trillionaires say it's not about the money. But this idea that like even if you manage to put an adult brain into a supercomputer, that we wouldn't be able to like make it do all the work it's supposed to do because there's something about our minds that just doesn't think that way. That does sort of track for me.
Sure. I mean, I feel like that's something we see in other sci-fi properties. Nothing is popping. No specific examples are popping to mind.
I still have to, help my parents connect some stuff to the internet. And like sometimes it's, this is a fake example, but like their fridge, like why would they know how to do that? They lived in a world where none of those things existed. So I get the idea of like a flexible mind is able to
or like
execute stuff better.
The notion that people often become more conservative just in general as they get older, right? And it's more about just like both social conditioning and comfort. Right. Their mind wants to be comfortable in their old ideas rather than being open to the way the world evolves over time. Stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, if it is that, then that leads me to believe that you are transferring somebody's soul over. If the mind isn't just a collection of memories, if it's quote unquote too stiff to expand to a new set of mental tools it could use, then that feels like it is transferring a person over. if this is what Wendy was told, but it is what the first kid says, which is just kids' minds are smaller, there's fewer memories, then this is an interesting question where it's like, if my grown-up mind needed to become a hybrid, but I also needed to shed some memories, that actually might make it more attractive to me. That's like eternal sunshine of the spotless immortality, and I'm kind of into it in this deep future. But, you know, would make it difficult for my loved ones, and definitely makes it difficult for Wendy and Joe. And then we also see, as they're transferring these children's consciousnesses into these bodies, we get like a montage, and we see that they put like a flower on their chest like they're dying, which doesn't make me feel better about the process.
Sure.
And then we see this sort of boy cavalier reading them from Peter Pan. And while Wendy's sleeping, she has her head in sort of like a device. And the part of Peter Pan he's reading is about sort of like cleaning up the mind. So it's also possible that there's like maintenance that needs to be done. And immediately after that, we see a sculpture of the three wise monkeys, the see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil monkeys. So Neil, how does that juxtaposition through editing make you feel?
I mean, there's a lot. I went down a wild rabbit hole here. First of all, this leads me to the interesting part about this being set in a city called New Siam, which is in reality, it was shot in Bangkok, Thailand, which, if you know the history of Thailand, it used to be called Siam when it was an absolute monarchy. It was called Siam, and it wasn't until it became a constitutional monarchy, they had a political revolution, and then it became Thailand. Thailand means I believe it literally means like free man land, the translation. So it's like, this is to suggest that in the future, now that it has been taken over by this corporation, they've kind of reverted back to absolute monarchy under Boy Cavalier, which is interesting, something to remember. But also, Thailand is a majority Buddhist country, and the Three Wise Monkeys are sort of a very prominent thing in Buddhist tradition. And it's obviously the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And it's about not necessarily dwelling on evil thoughts. So I think what we're keying in on is maybe there is something within this process of moving the human consciousness from an organic body to a synthetic body, that the maintenance is maybe trying to, you know, push out the intrusive thoughts or keep them out of the darkness. And trying to, especially because their emotional compasses are so screwy now, right? Because they're not getting the same sort of hormonal injections, from their body that regular organic humans do. That maybe, at least in Boy Cavalier's mind, or perhaps in their trials that they've been doing, we don't know we know that Wendy is the first successful one, but we don't know if they've had failed trials before, right? We don't know how this could have gone wrong in the past. If maybe they know that there is like a dark path that these hybrids can go down very easily because of the lack of emotion, right? Like, and I think he points this out, Boy Cavalier, in one of the scenes where he's talking about Timothy Oliphant's character, where he's like, he's not as useful. It's in that where he's talking about wanting to have an interesting conversation. It's like, he's just like an encyclopedia of, quotes, philosophical quotes. Like
book smart.
He's book smart. He's the ultimate book smart. But he doesn't have like the emotional intelligence that I'm looking for in a conversation. So it's like, but how do you achieve that emotional intelligence of like an actual human, a highly intelligent human mind, without any of the emotional underpinnings of the physicality of being an organic human? And I think that there are obviously some dangers there that they're trying to head off. And he seemed, especially because he's got this iconography all over his workshop, he seems very aware that, this could go wrong, right? That there are evil thoughts that he needs to keep these lost boys away from.
Yeah. I think if you go into a billionaire or trillionaire's office and they have the 3 wise monkeys or Saturn devouring his son, just quit. You're in a bad company.
Exactly.
But that may not be an option, as we see from like other new Siam people.
Well, it's
here,
interesting too, because it's not just the 3 wise monkeys. There's also like 3 human faces on his wall that are also in the same setup in the same sort of way, which is like, to me, I'm fascinated to see if the show is going to explore, especially as we move away, hopefully, from the crash site and get sort of back into the lab, potentially.
Right.
If they're going to tell us more about what happened prior to this, because so far it's all working as planned, right? Like Wendy and the Lost Boys, they're super strong. They seem to be adjusting relatively well, even though they're all children. But there's got to be a catch here. It can't be that easy.
Yeah. I mean, he also is very quick to just be like, send them all to this like dangerous question mark thing. So like, I agree with you. There's something additional.
His ominous bald butler guy is like, if we lose one of those, it's like a lot of money. We don't really want to do that. He's like, I don't care. But that's trillionaire behavior.
Also in that montage I was talking about, or we both talked about at this point, where she's transferring all the little Lost Boys over, they seem to be keeping the bodies. They like body bag the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I don't know if we're done with the details of this process yet, like you're hinting at.
Yeah.
Definitely some interesting questions.
Yeah. I would assume there's no going back, but you never know.
I mean, in the world of black goo alien world, all you need is some DNA, my man.
Yes, that's true.
We don't necessarily have to go all the way back.
I mean, they eventually figure out how to clone Ripley, so what are you gonna do?
Maybe it's more possible that way. Let's see if we can track what the Wendy and the Lost Boys can actually do. We got an email from Jamoy that said, wondering what you think about the storytelling decision they made to give Wendy access to all the surveillance systems in the country. I generally hate it when shows/movies do this, e.g. The God's Eye and Fast and Furious movies. But a few hours before I watched the episode, a friend showed me this article, so I guess it's in the realm of possibility. This is about an AI agent that deleted a company's database because they just let it go and do what it wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I did clock that this was a little bit weird, and I almost called foul when she's able to find Joe hiding in the elevator by flipping through screens, because I'm like, they said very specifically she's connected to the Prodigy like master server so they can monitor her, so
right.
She's hacking things that are only Prodigy coded, so she shouldn't be able to hack anything in the Weyland-Yutani ship. But that's when I realized that he had been chased back into the building.
In the elevator of the building, yeah.
And so that's why she was able to track him. So I do think this is interesting in that she's just using it as control, but it seems she's able to extend her control through emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is what... I don't know. I don't know if it's the nightmare, the dream of the current like AI, nightmare we're living through in the real world. But just like imagine there was an emotion behind it. Is that enough of a Neil? Yeah. Is a hacker with no emotions more dangerous than a hacker with emotions? I guess my question would be.
Well, I honestly think that it's a slightly different. In my mind, I clocked it as a slightly different thing, which is I registered more the surprise on everyone else's face in the room when she started to do it, which is this naivete, right? We're seeing in our own real world about AI. And this, I think, is Jay Moy's point here with this article that they sent us about, like, be careful what you wish for when you give AI access to, important things, right? Like they initially gave her this access, as we see, so that like Boy Cavalier can sit in his safe office
and literally
room,
look through her eyes,
and look through all of their eyes at different points along these episodes. And so you would assume that it's like they see the value in that, but they did not necessarily expect that she would, because of her emotional ties to her brother, she would immediately go way further than they expected, right? And take control and become a far more dangerous entity immediately to their systems. So I think that's a very important story point, especially again, if these Lost Boys start to go rogue in any way. We now know that they can't be easily controlled necessarily, or it may not be as easy to control them, or they may do something before the people at Prodigy really realize that it's happening. And I think that's one of the dangers of allowing sort of an artificial intelligence to have a personality, right? I think it's interesting. It kind of dovetails with our real life, where it's like one of the big problems that we're seeing now with some of these like AI chatbots is that by personalizing them and by giving them sort of these emotional facades as if they are people, we are allowing people to confuse them, as being real and letting them in, letting the guard down. And if the AI were more of a cold, calculated, like a cold, controlled, non-emotional thing, if it was more Timothy Oliphant's character than Wendy, it's easier to control, it's easier to predict their behavior. But because Wendy has that human mind inside of her that has access to previous emotions, she's not going to play by those same restrictions that like a pure ice cold robot mind would. So I think this is just like the tip of the iceberg of what she's capable of. So I like it. I think that it makes sense in a story sense that they would want to be able to like track her, but be careful who you let into your system, because if she decides that she's no longer on the team, that puts everything in danger, because she seems to be able to access to the point where she stops her brother from being able to quit, right? Like the implication there is that with that whole HR bot scene is that maybe he would have been let out of his contract, but she stops it, right? She apologizes for it later, so this idea that maybe Boy Cavalier, despite his trillions of dollars and heightened intelligence, he may not be in control of this operation anymore already.
Yeah. I think there's a danger also that he's not seeing, which is if emotions probe them to go deeper into this coding two-way street that they're able to do, then what happens if they turn their emotions up to like account for puberty or something? They discussed doing that earlier in the episode, but like, is that the danger that pushes them to find this coding? Or our adult mind's super flexible, but the second Neil or I get in a synthetic body, we're like, oh wait, we could recode the stoplights? Like, is that the first thing that we do? Because we're test driving our new mind.
It's the Skynet situation all over again. It's like if you give this artificial intelligence access to your systems and it decides that humanity is not worth saving anymore, then you get nuclear holocaust.
Yeah.
Be careful what passwords you leave on the desk in front of the AI bots. It's very dangerous.
I love this world where it's like, if AI starts to take over the world, the point of humans is to be just as predictable as possible, because the second you're an outlier, the machines will just be like, we don't need that outlier. Snip. So
absolutely.
What a world of forced compliance.
Yeah.
Also, you have here a hearing frequency chart comparison. Would you like to explain this to me and the listeners?
Well, I'm very curious in tracking their physical attributes. Obviously, we see her jump off a cliff and survive it. That's pretty great. She's got insane strength that she can tap into. But the hearing thing is interesting because it immediately comes back later when she can hear the xenomorph walking around, basically. And also the scene at the end of the second episode where the other one that's with her, is it Smee that's with her, or Nibbles? I forget the name.
I think it's Smee. I think Nibbles is the girl.
Yeah, Nibbles is the girl. But he's like, I can hear the sound of like the ship bending, and it's actually the sound of the xenomorph like running. And so I was like, what? Because they say that she can hear above 75,000 hertz. And I was like, what does that even mean? Right. And how much better is that than a normal human? Normal human hearing range, according to this research that I did, is between 31 hertz and 19,000 hertz, which is, we are very comparable to like an owl or a chinchilla or a horse or a cow. We're all kind of in that. And there are a bunch of birds too that hear even worse than we do. But as you rise up, animals that we consider to have really good hearing, for example, dogs, right? You think about dog whistles that humans can't hear, but dogs can. Dogs can only hear up to 44,000 hertz. But if you go higher, you get to stuff like guinea pigs, 49,000. To get into the high 70s, you would have to be a cat, which I think is very interesting. Kind of a specific pull, because the cats are 55 hertz to 77,000. And it isn't until like you can get over 100,000 hertz, but you would have to at that point be either a whale or a dolphin or some sort of porpoise. So
listening to things in a liquid environment that helps sound travel faster.
Being able to hear underwater would be. So at least so far, we don't know if that's the limit of her hearing, because she stops the test to control their entire network and find her brother. But she has basically the same hearing as a cat, which unfortunately, as we see in this episode, does not prevent the cat from having a horrible death, but is significantly better, like twice as good at least as human hearing. So pretty significant jump. And I think, especially because it comes up multiple times, I think this is going to be a recurring theme of like what they can hear that everyone else in the room can't. Yeah.
And I'm super interested to see what the clicking is she hears, because I agree when we first do it, it's the alien. But the second time, I'm wondering if it's the eggs talking to the alien. This seems sort of like insect-like, which is something that I was hoping for in this series to sort of bring back to the xenomorph, where like insects will communicate through like body percussion they're able to make. Your cicadas or your grasshoppers or whatnot.
Yeah.
So this might be
and all of these alien species are insect-like, so that would track.
So it'll be interesting to see if it is like a frequency thing. I think it's really smart where they have that scene where not only do we get like the bypass or sort of the talked over lore of her hearing frequency, but they also have a moment to reconnect it to human sexuality, which I thought wasn't going to be a thing since we're dealing with children and nobody seems to be wanting to have sexy times, which is fine. But the sort of idea of like the egg and the sperm, and she thinks sperm is funny, is good, because the Alien franchise is sort of about like a sexual reproduction horror. Yeah. So as we're looking at these new species, which we'll get to in a sec, I want to get to the VFX question first.
Sure.
But as we start looking at these new species, I think it's also interesting to clock not only what these species do, but how and if they're going to reproduce.
Yeah. And the other thing about the hearing is that I am curious to see, because we haven't really seen any of the cyborgs, the other synthetic entities in the show experience any of that. I wonder if the hybrids have sort of a different level of being able to hear. And I wonder if that is a sort of a consequence of them being a hybrid, rather than like, can Timothy Oliphant's character also hear that clicking? Or is this something that only the hybrids can do? Because if so, then now we have this very small group of characters who may be able to commune with the alien species in a way that no other characters in the franchise have been able to do yet.
I'm going to return to that either later in the calm or in the storm, but like we do need to talk about that. Let's first, though, go to this email from Jaxie. Said, first off, it dawned on me this morning that I'm in year 15 or 16 of following Dave's work. Can't believe it's been so long since I was reading juicy Marvel stuff on Latino Review. So cheers, and thanks for that. Cheers back, Jaxie.
That's probably what Iron Man set photos.
Oh, yeah. 2000s. There's a whole bunch of stuff. That was the first time Disney got mad at me. The email continues. Now, I was watching Alien Earth last night and ran into one of the most common issues with modern media discussed online: animated VFX. While majority of the episodes look great, there were still some seams to me. The first jump Wendy takes off the cliff was odd to my eyes, maybe a weight issue, and the scene where yet another thing levels yet another skyline, the Weyland-Yutani ship, the particles being thrown around everywhere, and the lighting made the whole thing look a little muddy. As you could tell, I'm not professional, and I don't really have a hands-on lexicon to describe what I'm seeing, but I know just enough to be able to call out some funky VFX, or I could be completely wrong. So, a request. Based on Neil's most excellent TV settings corner from the Game of Thrones days, I was wondering if at some point we could get a corner from Dave really breaking down some of the stuff he always mentions. I specifically used weight as an example because he often brings that up on Fighting in the War Room. I feel like it could be an all-timer Storm segment. So Neil, I do want to talk about these VFX that Jack's calling off here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say begin the polygon probe segment where you and I discuss the visual effects here in Alien Earth. I do have an answer, I think, for the jumping, but I want to hear from you, Neil, because I think the crash, some great sound mixing.
Yeah, for sure.
The first thing that's happening when the crash is happening is I'm like, this sound is amazing.
Yeah.
The second thing that's happening is Joe and his team of security walk out, and we get this big panning shot, and the ship is still dug into the building, and it's engines are still kind of firing, and then it becomes a scene of digital smoke. And I was like, Neil Miller is going to be very mad at all these clean people in the digital smoke. So what did you feel like in the crash sequence, visual effects wise, wins and loses?
I mean, I think I agree with Jack that there are some seams there, and digital smoke, of course, one of my hobby horses. I don't love it. What I will say, though, is that the scene moves in a way that it sort of distracts you from the digital smoke, right? Like as he's walking through, I think the scene is chaotic enough. The sound mix is good enough. The shot where he's like walking and then like a dude gets just slammed by falling debris is pretty great. Like there's enough to distract you away from the seams that I think most people aren't going to be bothered by this. But I do think the cause of this, or maybe it's not necessarily the cause, but there's a slightly more challenging thing that this show is doing than, say, Andor, right? Because in Andor, we are existing in oftentimes completely digital worlds. We're doing a lot of stuff out in space. I mean, compare the stuff in the opening of this show that is all set in space that looks pristine and beautiful and like straight out of it looks just as good as Alien Romulus, I will say, right? Some of the exterior stuff in that movie, which is a far more expensive project than what they're doing here. Where you get into some more challenging territory is when you're trying to blend your animated effects with real life settings. Right. So like her jumping off of the real cliff or the spaceship crashing into a real city that is, there's probably plenty of digital extension going on. That's not an accurate, recreation of Bangkok. Exactly. They probably added some buildings and whatnot, but it gets a little bit more challenging. And I think that's where you get the impulse to add a lot of like digital dust and particles and stuff to cover up those seams. But I think that the show isn't lingering on that too much. And it's moving, it moves quickly enough through it to get us to the stuff that is clearly practical builds, right? The interiors of the ship, the interiors of the building, the stuff that is just really well done production design wise. So it doesn't bother me as much. We will see sort of as the series goes along, if we get more, if we have to spend more time with like big action sequences outside. But my guess is that ship crashing is maybe the biggest outdoor VFX sequence we're going to see. Right? Like a lot of the other stuff is going to be close quarters, guy in a suit chasing, characters down a hallway, stuff like that, which all looks fantastic. Right? Like by the time I got to the end of episode 2, like I was similarly bothered, I guess, by the crash sequence and the digital dust, not so much the jumping, because I was like, this is a character who has like superhuman abilities jumping off of a cliff, it's going to look a little funny. There's no way to make that look perfect. But by the time I got to the end of episode 2 and I had seen all of the xenomorph close quarters action, I was like, this show rules. Like, this show looks like $1 billion. And it's because I think they commit to a lot of very good practical effects when it counts. And so, yeah, it doesn't bother. I also think it's as much as it's a little too gray and a little too washed out. The sequence where he walks out of their transport vehicle and like the ship is like right there is cool. And I think most of it, as you mentioned, is like the sound design is doing like 80% of the work, and it's awesome.
The major problem I had with the outdoor sequences during the ship crash is I feel like they bumped the contrast down. Like once the digital smoke comes in, I don't feel a volume to the smoke. It feels like an overlay. And I think it is covering some cuts and covering some seams. So that's why it feels like an overlay. But the rest of the interior stuff is so good about the photography and the contrast, basically because they're trying to hide the alien for some surprises and at the end of certain shots. But that's like based on the, Ridley Scott, James Cameron movies, that sort of feel. But when it's out in the world, the shadows don't feel dark enough to me. The highlights don't feel bright enough to me. That muddiness that Jack might have been seeing was, to me, sort of like they bumped the contrast down while we were outside. I don't know if it was to make things... I mean, it might have just been to make the mood of the city look a little bit more Blade Runner-ish.
Yeah.
It's like it looks gray because they want the world to feel gray. I could see that going through some shot approvals and just being like, that's actually the look we're going for. That makes sense to me.
Sure.
Also, I think they're choosing where to spend some money. If a ship like that were to re-enter the atmosphere, we saw in, depending on what version of Alien Resurrection you saw, it would create friction and flames in the atmosphere. And we look up and we see this ship coming in like it's on a controlled descent. And my mind sort of blips a little bit because I have lived with VFX long enough that I know, I think, what a spaceship entering the atmosphere is supposed to look like to me, and this one didn't look like that.
Sure. And I think color-wise, it's noticeable because also of I think the richness of color that we get when we visit Neverland Island, right? And that's just like a location shot, right? It's just like a beautiful island that they're shooting on, in and around Thailand. And that might detract from the way we feel about when the ship crashes. But I feel like it's kind of a trade-off, right? Like we're getting these beautiful, more natural landscape shots as a trade for the more drab sort of cityscape. But also, I think in the second episode, when they're approaching the city at night, it looks significantly better, right? Yeah. It's mostly just the daytime stuff where they're covering up the seams. Like the nighttime approach shot looks really good.
And then I think the jumping one only really bothered me for the landing because she's landing on a beach. So I don't care how strong she is. She either makes a crater or she kicks up dust. And neither of those things happen.
Sure.
So I agree with you. That special effect is weird.
She's weightless there at the end.
I'm not going to be the guy in the meeting, looking at the file shot being like, actually what we need, because those fixes can also look equally as bad.
That hits Essie Davis in the face.
We need sand, and let's digitally make a crater. Like those are probably bad solutions. So I get why they did it. Neil, as you mentioned, it gets the story point across. She's the superhuman. So we don't need necessarily perfect.
Not only is she superhuman, but she has already discovered enough of her limitations that she doesn't fear jumping off of a cliff, right? I feel like a lot of that is just to establish a lot of these first 2 episodes does a good job of establishing not only that they're have the minds of children, but that they, because of their lack of sort of emotional complexity, because of their lack of hormones, they also don't seem to fear anything, which is really, really interesting territory for sort of your core group of characters in an alien movie, to have none of them fear what's happening.
Well, especially if we're going to make the aliens responsive to fear. That means we're going to get some close-up action. It's also interesting because Kirsch is trying to talk them out of fear. They are initially hesitant to approach one of the aliens, but he's like, fear is an animal thing. And as we learned from him in a different monologue, we're not food anymore. We grew out of that.
Sure.
Let's talk about some of those creatures and the way they killed people. Because you know what's a fantastic visual effect is what happens to that poor cat.
Yeah.
No cats were injured, I hope, in the making of this, but that was a full character moment that led to like body terror that was, I think, so much more effective than what we got at the end of episode 1. But let's go through this monster index, starting with what you've labeled the trypophobic nightmare eyeball land squid.
Yeah. I've given them my own names. I know they have internal names, but they terrify me in all unique ways. But yeah, unfortunately, this is the one that gets Jones's cousin. It's terrible. Just terrible situation for the cat. The eyeball.
Well, at least Jones's cousin. I think in one of the flashes, we see somebody with a bulged eyeball, but maybe I'll leave that for the storm.
Sure.
It is in the cat. The people in interviews have been calling it the eyeball midge, which made me look up a midge. It's a type of like parasitic fly.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I didn't see it fly. It seems like a squid.
It's jumpy.
To me. But also in that Collider interview with Noah Hawley, I was talking about the interviewer calls it a he, and he's like, interesting, you've gendered it. Again, I think we have to ask with each one of these creatures, A, how creeped out are by it? Let's do this. A, level on the creepy scale from, let's say classic 1 lowest, 10 highest. 2, are we going to see it reproduce and how? I think that's absolutely scary, but something we could question. And then 3, this is just for you and me and our Storm of Spoilers listeners. Let's name these individual things. I don't want to call it the trypophobic nightmare eyeball land squid all the time. The second episode's called Mr. October in honor of the baseball and the Reggie Jackson story that was his real nickname in the 70s. But when I was rewatching part of it on my phone and I turned it sideways, it shortened it to Mr. Octo, and I was like, oh, that's not a bad name for our little eyeball guy. So Neil, how scary is the eyeball? Are we going to see it reproduce? Do you have a better name than Mr. Octo?
Well, I mean, I feel like this is like a kind of a 10 out of 10 scary. Because again, the trypophobia, something I recently researched because of our Hannibal rewatch, is terrifying stuff. So many eyeballs. And the splitting of the eyeballs is extremely scary. And so I think this is a very scary monster. Whether or not it reproduces is very interesting because it does not seem to be, it seems to be more of like parasitically surviving, right? Because it doesn't seem to be reproducing when it's in the cat. It's just sort of like,
well, the cat's also in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
So it kind of has to leave the cat.
It seemed to be like feeding off the cat and then it left to go maybe find a new host. So we haven't seen whether it's going to reproduce yet. But it's a pretty gnarly way to go if this thing attaches itself to you. So I think that makes it extremely scary. But yeah, Mr. Octo is a pretty fun one. It's certainly more interesting than Eyeball Midge. Come on now.
I like Mr. Octo. I agree it's a 10. If they're calling it an Eyeball Midge, I'm thinking this thing sprouts wings, which freaks me the fuck out.
I mean, if it flies, it's an 11 out of 10.
Or like, when does it fly? Yes. Anyway,
can it turn into a little helicopter with its tentacles? That's crazy.
How much can it control a person when it's in the eyeball socket? We just saw like half a cat, so we don't know that much. But like, if it's in a person, can it talk? Can't wait to find out. We have what you've called the giant petal pod tentacle sac. We don't see what it does yet, but it is very drippy, and it does seem to have moved from the zoological room into a corridor. I am going to say it's a little tentacle that is sticking something out. It's a little pistol there that it sticks out at the end. Even though we don't see it do anything, does bring it to like a 6 or 7 to me, but it does seem like I can get pretty close to it without it doing anything. So I'm going to say 6.
Sure.
And I'm going to want to call it the Audrey 2 because, again, I've watched Little Shop of Horrors.
I like that. I mean, yeah, it does seem to be the most peaceful in the sense that if you leave it alone, it's not going to attack you, right? Like the little eyeball guy, Mr. Octo, he just straight up will attack you if you're in the room.
He needs another eyeball.
Obviously, the xenomorph is going to come find you, but we'll get to him. But this guy, as long as you're not messing with him, is cool. Then again, we don't know what's going to happen when those petals open up and this thing blooms. So this is like a nightmare flower to me, where it's like the nightmare is not knowing what's inside there. And the fact that it sprouts this very terrifying tentacle is enough to kind of get it up into like a 7. But I'm also definitely not getting anywhere near this thing. So it'll be interesting to see how this one evolves. I feel like this is the one that's going to maybe change the most. So
when they ask if it's flora or fauna, I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, what if its petals turn inside out and it's a little Bulbasaur?
Yeah,
that like runs around. Like it could be. We don't know what's in that.
My guess
sack,
is a little bit of both.
Yeah,
maybe it's a flora that births a fauna.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's dripping. So like, it's up there on our. All of these things are goo-tastic.
Sure.
Over on.
And so far, especially because we, the audience, are aware of some of the goos in the Alien franchise, at the very least, its goop is non-corrosive. So I think that makes it slightly less scary, right? Like it's not eating through the hull of the ship.
Well, I didn't hear you pitch another name, so it's Audrey 2 until
Audrey
we
2.
figure out what's inside there. If it's not a big mouth that sings, and maybe it becomes a Bulbasaur, we'll figure it out. Then we have the web-weaving blood bag worm. This is the space leech. We definitely see it multiple times across both episodes. But I like the web-weaving thing because it does lower itself on a little piece of silk, which is gross and terrifying. Where do you rate this one, Neil?
Oh, I mean, I think this, especially because we get to see 2 people go down terribly to this is another 10 out of 10. Super scary. Because it kills you in a really horrific way. Like it specifically crawls around that dude's face until it finds the artery in his neck, which is so terrifying, which means that this thing, obviously it's an alien species, but it instinctively can sort of read human anatomy to get to your most vulnerable point, right? Like that artery in your neck is where like the most blood flow happens. So like it being able to sense that and using that to then fill up a weird blood sac to do what? I don't know, right? I also feel like similar to the pedal pod guy, this one could turn into just about anything. And now there are 2 of them running around.
Yeah. I definitely think it's gross. I trying to think about how to give this dude a name. Maybe we should give it like a Spielbergian name. So it's like a blood-sucking leech. So who's like a public figure we hate? I want to Bruce the Shark this leech.
It's like the Stephen Miller of.
Yeah, let's do it. It's the Stephen Miller worm.
This is the Stephen Miller worm. Santa Monica fascist Stephen Miller worm.
He's gonna suck all your blood. I agree. This one is like 8 or 9 to me, just because it seems like you don't have that much. I've gotten leeches by being outside. The only saving grace is I get to remove them before they suck all of my blood. This one seems like that might not be a possibility. The idea of it weaving a web means it can bind me. I don't know how strong its web is, but one of the nice things about a leech is it does it. So this one's almost like leech plus spider.
Yeah. Well, it's like a vampire spider.
Yeah. It's just why we're calling it Stephen Miller worm.
Yeah.
But like, I feel it could be like a Roose Bolton worm, but that's too much of a throwback. Let's say though, I think this thing reproduces in the blood.
Okay.
So like it sucks the blood and then its larvae are in its big blood because I don't think it digests that fast enough. It definitely is ready to swell up to a size that seems too big for it when it's like fully gorged. it's sort of sliding around and being a mess.
Now, do you
But I
think?
think it has to create like a feeding womb out of somebody's blood. So that would be my guess on how it reproduces. Like if you pop it, there's like 10 of them.
Oh, gnarly. Here's another question. Do you think, now we know that it is removing blood from its victims, do you think that it's putting anything into their bodies?
I don't know. They look kind of like dried and sucked out. So I don't know what that would feed for, like
Sure.
dry flesh or something, but that's a possibility.
Yeah. Well, and it's curious because there's, we don't know what has necessarily happened to the Mangino's crew yet specifically. Like, obviously, some of them had chest bursters like that, we know. But like, there's the one, I believe her name is, she's like the science lady.
At the toxin death?
Chibuzo. Yeah, where they're like the soldiers that find her, like, it's like a toxin death. So I wonder if that is this or if there's something we haven't seen yet. Because so far,
there's also the woman in the pod who has what looks like a chest burster, but it hasn't broken through the pod. When they get to the one that broke through the pod, they're like, something crawled out of here.
Mhm.
But there's another lady with like a hole and like it seems like her side, like near her side rib cage.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, maybe the chest burster just found a weaker place to burst out. But now I'm like, who's to say that's the only
Sure.
thing that lays eggs in you?
And it's also important to point out that we are only really looking at 4 so far. And we have been told in interviews that there are at least 5 unique species.
Well, I think
or in the
there's
trailer,
that-
he says there's 5.
Yeah. There's a flying thing that I don't know enough about to put on this monster.
The thing
index
that's like
so
slamming
far.
up against the glass.
Yeah, and sort of
that we
like
don't
flies.
get a clear view of yet.
Which is like wasps lay eggs inside of somebody and then they hatch and eat them alive. So maybe you'll get your wish and inside eating there. But also,
Sure.
I don't believe that trailer anymore because let's talk about the xenomorph.
Yes.
You have a list here, the Olympian xenomorph, which I like. Is approximately 8 feet tall and armored, as described by Joe. We're going to talk about the xenomorph. We obviously don't have to talk about it, whether or not it's going to reproduce, because that seems kind of obvious. But in terms of how this xenomorph is acting in comparison to how other xenomorphs have acted in other alien movies, how is this one working for you?
I mean, the reason why I call it the Olympian xenomorph is because this one moves and jumps and has an athleticism that, you kind of couldn't do with the effects of the 1970s, especially because, they were doing guy in a suit. But I think that they've actually done a really good job here of not showing any seams between what are digital and what is actually practical with this xenomorph. Like, it all looks good and it moves super fast. It's even scarier because of how fast and agile it is. And I think that that's incredibly terrifying. The other note that I think is important to point out about the xenomorph is that Noah Hawley kept telling us that there's only one in this show. And I already don't believe that. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's 50 facehuggers on that ship.
Well,
And
there's like one that they saw
a bunch of
dissected.
eggs.
Yeah, there's one that's dead in the pod. The egg apparently still seems to be locked up, which is weird because now there's 6 eggs on the bridge. And then the face huggers that they have seem to be like embalming fluid and are also still there after the crash.
Yeah.
So where did the xenomorph come from?
Exactly. And I also think that it's a very cool scene where Morrow takes the xenomorph down, right, with his super gun, which is very
With
new.
his taser and Spider-Man web.
Yeah. But if we have now established that within this show's story world that they have the ability to subdue a xenomorph that easily, this can't be the last this can't be the strongest version of the xenomorph we're going to see, because then it's too easy, right? Then you just need that one gun.
Right.
So it's like, we need something that can defeat that gun. And I think that, that's why we have so many eggs.
Oh, we have a lot of eggs. How did those eggs get there?
We'll see.
Thought I knew how eggs got there.
Yeah.
I mean, Alien Covenant did sort of muddy how eggs got there, but there are eggs outside of the cargo hold or outside the zoological station. So that seems like it's something that we'll come back to.
But I like that they've established that the xenomorphs in this show are significantly more athletic and that makes them much more terrifying. And I think it's more fun because they're running around in recognizably Earth-like places, right? They can jump off of buildings. We could see them running across fields and tracking people.
I mean, that was the best thing about
valleys.
AVP Requiem was that scene where the girl's like, there's a monster outside my window. And they're like, no, honey, but it was a xenomorph. Like that was great. That was really the only reason to watch that movie. And so now to have them in more like recognizable things, I think is great.
I mean, I think my favorite sequence of these two episodes is the xenomorph in the hallway of like the penthouse hallway, right? Outside of the dinner scene where he's like hiding in the statue and then he grabs the guy and just shakes him. I'm like, all right, this is an upgrade in a way that still makes sense in the world, but amps up the terror of what this thing can do now that it's loose. And I think that's very important for the show to establish immediately.
We haven't quite gotten outside of, I think, Alien works best in claustrophobia because we are in some buildings and things that we have to, have trouble moving around. But I am excited to see this alien in a non-claustrophobic atmosphere because I do think it's not just hunting. It's doing something I don't understand, which brings me back,
it had
I think,
beef
to the first
with the
Alien a lot
Caspians,
more.
I think. It was like, I gotta go get these rich people.
Yeah, he's like, he doesn't like the Caspians. We know that. But like Alien, in the first Alien, when Ripley goes in like the escape pod, when she wakes the alien up or whatever, it looks like it's just hiding and napping. It's not like stalking her.
Yeah.
So this alien that like is kind of hiding, but then decides, screw it, I'm going to kill everybody, is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I am perfectly fine calling him the Olympian if you want to keep going. That seems like a cool name for
that's a good starting
alien.
point for this first xenomorph, because again, I don't think this is going to be the only one. I think Noah Hawley's messing with us.
I don't think so either.
Classic TV showrunner behavior.
But maybe we could talk about more of that in the storm. Neil, is there anything we need to cover before we transition into the storm?
I feel like we got quite a lot of it. I mean, I do have questions that we'll have to answer as we go along. Like, did the Nostromo have an impact room? And stuff like that. And
I don't think we're done with the Maginot.
And
that's good.
How important is Ice Age Continental Drift, the fourth movie in the Ice Age franchise? We'll see. But yeah, I feel like we've mostly covered it so far. Also, have we seen I think this is a good calm question. Have we seen cyborgs sweat before?
Oh.
Like, did Rook or Ash, or did they? Because we've seen them bleed white blood.
Ash did the white sweat, right? When he's like freaking out, it's like the single drop
sweat?
of white comes down.
Because Morrow sweats like a human, clear sweat, which I think is interesting. But then again, seems to be sort of a different model of cyborg anyway because of his arm having its
he's
abilities.
like, I mean, just the fact that he's part human. I want to be like, which part and how much, like, because
I guess if he's a cyborg,
like
then he's human with robot parts. He's not a full synthetic. It'll be weird if we see Timothy Oliphant sweat, I guess.
They have Morrow sweat, and they also have him use an oxygen mask when he's crashing, which I also noted.
Okay.
So he's definitely got lungs and sweat glands, but beyond that, we don't really know what's going on with Morrow.
He does seem to be able to calm himself enough to where the xenomorph doesn't eat him immediately, though.
I think it's fear. I've seen some chatter online that the only time we haven't seen an alien kill somebody is because there's spawn in him. So maybe Morrow, by being a cyborg, isn't fully immune to some of the alien things. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens going forward.
Sure.
But until then, let's see if we can guess as we transition into the storm. All right, Neil, this morning on Wednesday, we're recording this, they released a coming up this season trailer for Alien Earth. What did you make of this trailer and sort of ways it's pointing for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's very cool. I mean, we see at one point Wendy and the Lost Boys in some sort of prison, so they're going rogue. Like that is a theme that is going to continue. And then, of course, as we sort of hinted at in the calm, there's this notion that maybe because of their heightened sensory abilities, she seems to be able to communicate with the aliens, or at least understand what the clicking means.
Do you think that's the Lost Boys, or do you think that's specifically Wendy?
It'll be interesting to see if they all have that. I mean, I think obviously the way the show is positioning her and the way that like Boy Cavalier talks about her, she is unique, but I think we have to assume that they all sort of have the same skill ceiling, I guess, right? Like those synthetic bodies they put them into would reasonably have sort of the same potential, I guess.
Yes.
But
unless there's something that they can't account for,
right, that
she has that the other ones don't. I wasn't on this track at all until they brought up the dad with like extensive flashbacks. I'm like, oh,
sure. With a great cameo from Noah Hawley himself as the dad.
Yes. If this is important, then should I be asking who her mom is? Should I be asking, was she genetically messed with to begin with?
Sure.
There's a whole bunch of questions where it's going to be interesting to see if they're just talking to her.
Is it as simple as the fact that her brother is there and that she can act, and that maybe enhances sort of the return or brings forward some of the emotional memories that she has that allow her to maybe get to another level? Because, you know, even though we see some of the other Lost Boys say like, I want to go home, or I wish I go, none of them seem to have access to their previous lives the way she does. So I think that, especially because as we see in this preview, Joe seems to be he's going to stay with them, right? We see him in like the lab setting in one shot in this upcoming preview. So maybe his presence alone, I mean, I guess that spoils that he survives, but I think that's actually kind of funny. That like it seems like this guy is probably the most breakable character, right? He's the human in the group, and he's going to be constantly in danger and somehow surviving. That to me is a funny gag. But like maybe just having him there allows her to access more of her pre-existing soul, quote unquote, than some of the other Lost Boys. Then again, I expect
like that. You need other people to be human. Is a fun message.
I also kind of expect that maybe not all of them are going to make it very far, right? Like they've already hinted that losing one of them could be catastrophic, but like what happens when they start losing a bunch of them?
Well, and maybe that's enough to be going rogue. Like when I saw them in prison, I was just like, oh, they don't get to be out anymore. Yeah. Not that they did anything wrong, but just like something happened where there's like, this isn't worth the financial risk. Or they like just have to be kept much more under guard, because in these 2 episodes, they like let her watch her brother whenever she wants. Sure. And that is a very different.
Or like once they've secured the specimens, they're like, well, now we need to lock them down again, because we're a little bit worried about how far Wendy was able to go with her control over like our systems and stuff. So maybe they get a little nervous. So this trailer
seems to say that Prodigy will recover all of the species and then continue testing on them to sort of figure out who they are, which, you know, also brings all these species somewhat into captivity. But then we see a xenomorph crawling into a drain pipe, and that xenomorph looks a little bit more yellow and green in the headspace than the black one we see here. So I think you're on to more xenomorphs. But I am wondering if once these things are all inside of Prodigy, if these experiments involve triggering their reproduction somehow.
Sure. Yeah.
So like there's 6 eggs and 5 invasive species. Like somebody posted some very hastily done fan art that was obviously done on like a phone, but just it was the alien and he drew a whole bunch of eyeballs on it and is like, I can't wait to see these 2 species mashed together. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's, you know, that could be pretty gnarly. I also think it'll be interesting to see, because again, I mentioned the pacing. of these first couple episodes, and like feeling like we get to the end of the second episode, and even though they zip by, it's like, oh, we're still at the crash site. I'm kind of curious to see how much longer we'll be at the crash site. My guess is maybe one more episode, and then they get back to this Neverland Island. And I actually think that, especially from like a visual effects standpoint, that could be a really good decision if it goes from aliens loose in the city to now they're loose on this island, right?
Right.
Because then
now we've got the Jurassic Park problem where
it's funny.
They won't take over the world. We could always come back to the island.
It's funny because we did Jay Moy, who sent us an email, also messaged us in Slack and was like, are you guys getting Jurassic Park vibes from these first couple episodes? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. But I feel like this coming up this season trailer gives me even more Jurassic Park vibes, where it's like, if they bring all these specimens back to this island where also our rich guy seems to be, and this is where all of the weird shit is, then what happens if they get loose on this island? Now, and then very excitingly, now we could have xenomorphs like jumping off of a cliff and killing people. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. We also last week debated when the flashback episode was going to be. We now know it's episode 5, called In Space No One Can Hear You, or In Space No One. So we know that's going to be the flashback to what happened in the Maginot. We get some flashes of what happens here. I believe that like head engineer, the guy who's playing the cards and telling the other guy how the corporations work,
Michael Smiley,
he gets a flash.
Great actor. Actor Michael Smiley from like he's in Black Mirror and Spaced, and he was on Doctor Who at one point. He's fantastic. As soon as he popped up on screen, I'm like, oh, it's that guy.
During the montage flashes, there's a flash with him with a bulging eye, and I was like, oh no.
That's right.
So we're gonna get to see some of that.
That's where the cat got it. Oh no.
Well, there was some promotional material sent out to certain groups covering the show. I believe they were also part of an ARG that they launched earlier this week, where you could, I think,
a lot of them
5
ended up
cities
on YouTube as well.
Yeah,
like YouTube shorts.
But these are from the perspective of a camera on the cat, sort of going around the ship before it crashes, and have some little clips. The one that was most interesting to me is it does look at some point that the cat's running around the ship and the ship is going through a self-destruct sequence, which it is not by the time we pick up on it crashing into the earth, presumably to keep the species alive. So episode 5, something's going to happen. They're going to be like, let's blow up the ship, and the cyborg's going to undercut them somehow, as we see in this episode. So kind of get an idea that's going on. Very sad that the cat doesn't make it through. But that looks to be like in the direction we're going. Given that we know the flashback is episode 5, it's an 8-episode series. Does that give you a little bit more of an answer to your crash site question? Do you think we spend up until 5 at the crash point, crash site, and then 5 is the pivot to back to the island? Do we get back to the island faster, and then there's a big event, and then we cut back to 5?
Yeah, but
we talked a little bit last week about why do a flashback episode and break the story like that.
Yeah, I would almost say that I would stick with my maybe one more episode of the crash site, and then we have like an episode of 4 that ends with some sort of event on the island that forces us to like need that perspective of what happened on the ship, right? Because it is clear that as we go along, they're going to continue to give us little flashes of what happened, right? Like they do it in both of the first 2 episodes. And I don't think you keep that up forever, obviously, without just showing it to us. So I think that they're going to maybe continue to drip that for like another episode or so. And maybe we even go away from it for an episode where we like have a focus on what's going on the island. And then something happens. Yeah. That forces us to need to see the full story of what happened. Maybe it's like something about conflict between Yautja and Prodigy that comes into play.
Twice in the episode, once, I believe, in a Prodigy compound, and then once they've started recovering the Weyland-Yutani ship crash. There's a dude in what looks like a hazmat suit spraying a wall with a liquid.
Yeah, what's going on with this guy?
What's going on, Neil?
I have no idea. I can't tell if he's like sealing something up or if it's like because no one else around him is in a like Essie Davis's character walks by, the hybrid characters walk by, the children walk by, so it's not like a disinfecting job, right? Like it's but maybe it looks like he's like sealing something up, but the show keeps calling attention to it, so I can't stop thinking about what that might be and how that might become important. And I feel like, especially if the story is about to refocus away from the crash site and back to this island, that somehow that's going to be incredibly relevant to what's going on. Like, what are they trying to fix, or what sort of maintenance is required that would require that person to have a hazmat suit, but not everyone else around him? Is curious. Oh, I clocked that as well.
Yep. Gotta see what's happening.
Yeah.
And then I think question we have to ask in every storm until it happens or it doesn't. We're going to see a Yautja in this series. According to the big brain people across the internet that I have absorbed before we recorded this podcast, the drop ships that they use to get from Neverland to the crash site look kind of like Yautja ships. This one came from our buddies over at Screen Crush. And then there was a person on the LV426 subreddit who claims one of the sounds that we hear as they're entering the ship, and we're hearing all these different sounds, is in fact a Predator sound. So have the odds changed on if you think we see a Yautja? And if so, is it already here?
I mean, it could be, because they're invisible. Yautja, for the uninitiated, is a predator.
The Predator. I'm sorry. The Storm, I just assume you're all on my ultra dorky page right to begin with.
I mean, it could be, because they have that cloaking ability, so they could be walking around in all these scenes and we would never know. I will say that I was paying very close attention to Ms. Yutani's office, and I did not see any plasma guns just yet.
True.
The plasma gun from AVP has not shown up. But we know, and especially now that we have seen these first two episodes, and it doesn't feel like there is the approach to the show is so restrictive with regards to canon necessarily. Like, you know, they talked going into the show about maybe not adhering as closely to Ridley Scott's prequels, but they didn't do anything in these first two episodes to lead us away from those ideas, right? Like they're not bucking against any canon just yet. And I think that keeps stuff like the end of Alien versus Predator Requiem in the game until proven otherwise. So I don't know, man. I think it will until we get a clear answer to the contrary. I am going to be continually obsessed with Noah Hawley's quote about this, which is, he's like, you know, I'm not as interested in the Prometheus and Covenant stuff. He's like, but I do really like what Dan Trachtenberg is doing with Predator, and I would love it if we could all get along. And I'm like, bro. That once again, this is classic TV showrunner behavior, where he's just like sliding that in there. Did not need to say that. You know, of course, we already know that Weyland-Yutani factors into the next Predator movie because it's in the trailer. So it's like, I don't know, man. This is all being made under the Disney banner. And what does Disney love in this era more than anything? It is synergy, right? It is connective tissue in their storytelling worlds. So I don't think we're going to get through these 8 episodes without seeing something.
And we keep pushing back on when we learned about the Xenomorph, because Morrow seems to know what's up. He's got his taser gun and his Spider-Man gun, and like is aware of what's happening when he's crashing, it seems like. Mm-hmm. So
I mean, I think that's the most fascinating thing about the Maginot is, like, obviously the Nostromo is like a mining craft or like a freighter. So they weren't
Right,
prepared
that's
to
sent
deal
there-
with a xenomorph. But
Right.
like, it's clear that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation had science vessels that were extremely prepared to deal with these types of alien species.
Well, like in the real world, the chance of alien life is so remote that I can see them running into a predator first, because the predator's whole thing is about hunting other alien life forms. And so they're like, look at all the other alien life forms. Like, who gave them this idea of a mission to go out and collect other life forms?
Yeah.
Are they already aware of the LV-426 crash, and that's why they're sending the Nostromo there in 2 years? It is very interesting to me, because I thought
Or
this
is
would be
there
a
a
beginning.
giant crater where there used to be a town in Colorado where
Right.
where
Where
and
you
a
could
bunch
dig
of,
up some xenomorph skeletons that weren't melted by blue goo.
yeah, and the corporation that oversees North America is the one out there looking for aliens.
They found all the pyramids and they found all the queens. Yeah, I can't wait to figure out where Alien Earth begins according to Alien Earth. Because I was expecting this to sort of be like oh no, the xenomorph, but it seems like some people know what's going on already. And maybe this is a little more planned than it seems.
Yeah.
Maybe the unplanned thing was that it crashed into the wrong city.
Yeah, I need some exposition from Mrs. Yutani. Let's go.
Yes. Who has to hold down the entire fifth of the world because her business partner is cryogenically frozen, headed off to meet an engineer.
Who I guess he's
supposedly.
been dead at this point for a while, right? Weyland?
So they found the markings in the cave before this.
Mhm.
And if they sent Nostromo out, they sent that out with the Ash model. I just don't know how long it took Prometheus to get from Earth to LV, whatever it's on, 223 or whatever. Are they still sleeping, or is Weyland long dead and just nobody's told them? Do they know that Weyland's dead? That might be more interesting.
Sure. I mean, we know he's not on Earth anymore, at the very least.
He's not on Earth. Yutani is in charge of Weyland-Yutani. Which is good to know. That does answer some of our questions.
And she's got at least one plasma gun in her office somewhere.
That's what we think. And maybe a Lance Henriksen version of Weyland somewhere else. We're going to have to figure that out. Depending on what canon we will or will not scrape up upon. Pardon me. I think that does it. I think we did some good storming.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's happening in this series. But we are a fourth of the way through, I believe, already. That's what 2-episode premieres of 8-episode limited series do for you. So we will be back for at least the next 6 weeks to talk to you about developments in Alien Earth, see who's going to join Mr. Octo, Audrey 2, Stephen Miller Worm, and the Olympian. And hopefully Wendy and the Lost Boys are okay. I'm starting to care about them a lot.
Sure. Hopefully they get to meet a predator. That'd be fun for them.
That would be fun. Hopefully, yeah. Season 2 is AVP Earth. would love to see it. But until we join you again next Wednesday, you could, check us out, patreon.com/DaveandNeil. You could add us in our Slack once you get there, or email us at stormspoilers@gmail.com. We'll be seeing you next Wednesday.